Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening for this Human Factors Single Pilot CRM workshop. The workshop's brought to you by Astral Aviation Consulting Ltd on behalf of the UK Civil Aviation Authority. If you'd like to stay in the loop with events and resources, please do sign up to our mailing list, and you can do this through our website, which is www.astralaviationconsulting.com, or use the link that will be appearing in your chat box shortly. I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Matt Lane and Katy Lee. Matt is the head of training and an active single and multi-engine FIA and flight examiner. Katy is an airline pilot, currently flying the 737, as well as a GA flight instructor, human factors specialist, and holds an MSc in human factors in aviation. She also produces the podcast, The Human Factor, discussing lessons that can be learned from aviation incidents. Good evening to you both.
Hi.
Good evening.
Over the course of the next hour or so, we're going to break this workshop down into chunks. Kat and Matey are going to cover workload management and capacity, drugs, alcohol and their effect on performance, situational awareness, confirmation bias, and then finally it will be time for Q&A. So please, as we go, put any questions you have in the chat box. To kick us off, as always, I'd like to find out who's with us tonight. If you're watching live, any of the polls that we pop up throughout the course of this will pop up on your screen. However, if you're watching on demand, you won't be able to interact, but please do, for the questions that are relevant, do test your knowledge. Also, for those that you are with us live this evening, please do use the chat box throughout. Let us know where you are and certainly where you're flying from as well. Okay, without further ado then, who's with us this evening? Are you a PPL student, a license holder, a lapsed license holder, or none of the above? Please let us know. It's been really good for the last few workshops. We've had a very broad spectrum of people here from all different disciplines and all different skill levels and experience levels. So again, let us know and let's see who we've got this evening. Okay, let's have a look at the answers. Brilliant. Again, we've got a decent smattering. Most of you are license holders, which is great. A couple of lapsed license holders and a couple of others. For the others, please let us know in the chat box what you are, so to speak. Fantastic. Right then. So without further ado, that's the intro over and done. I'm going to hand over to Matt now, who's going to talk about workload management and capacity.
Hi, good evening, everybody. It's great to see so many people and so many numbers joining. And I can see popping up in the chat box as well, real spread of people from a helicopter, microlights, and all around as well, and some airline people as well, which will be great to hear people's experiences as we go through as well. We start each section traditionally with a poll. This is going to be no different. So let's have a look at the next poll, please. And this one is, what is most likely to increase your spare mental capacity? We've got lots of inputs occurring simultaneously. Practice, good health and diet, reduce stress, taking off straight after lunch, or landing late at night. Have a look and see what you think on there as well. Won't give you too much time on this one. It's good to get people's pretty much instinctive response on that as well. So let's see what answers we got, please. Practice, good health and diet was the answer that we were after there. 91% got that right as well. Lots of inputs occurring simultaneously. And that's interesting as well, that nearly 10% of you thought that is likely to increase your spare mental capacity, almost like in a training capacity. And we'll touch on that later as well. But what I'd like to think about with the answers to this question is, B, those answers there, practice good health and diet, reduce stress. Those are things that are coming from within us. Whereas the other answers there are things that are coming at us. So there's a little differential there to have a think about there. So this is spare mental capacity. Those things there are things coming from within us, things under our control perhaps as well. So let's hold that thought and think as we go through. All right, let's move on then and have a look at workload management and capacity. Some of you may have seen this diagram before, some of you may have not, or you may have seen variations of it as well. But what is this all about? Well, humans have limited capacity for processing information at any one time. That's our bucket. And it's a bit like running a computer with lots of programs open. If you've got lots of windows open, it's going to start slowing the system down. It's going to start degrading the information processing capacity. And ultimately, if you've got too much going on and the capacity is too full, you get the odd system crash. Well, that's what this diagram is all leading about. So an individual's only got a certain amount of capacity to work with, but this, unlike the bucket that you may see there, your amount, your capacity bucket is not fixed over time. Okay, so it's not a fixed amount for individuals as well. What it can do is we can increase that capacity bucket by things like reduced stress, good health and diet, and practice, like we looked at in that last question answer. If you think back to when you learned to drive, initially changing gear and keeping the car on the road was a real cognitive challenge. But as you drove more and as you went through the driving learning experience, gear changes became quite normalized and required less and less thought. And the same, if you want another example, is to think about a child learning to walk. Those initial tentative steps, they're really challenging and they consume just about every last bit of concentration that they have. But before long, walking becomes an automatic function almost, and they can start to do other things and get into other things. Remember, those of you that have got children, you remember suddenly, very quickly, they're cannoning around the place, getting into all types of stuff because the walking has got automatic. And if you think about it yourself, well, many of us kind of walk and talk on the phone. We can hold a conversation when we're walking along on our mobile phones. But also just think, what happens if you get some new piece of information or you get challenged on a question or something a bit startling? What do we instinctively do if we're walking around on a phone? We often just stop and then address that question. So just have a think about that as we go through this. But this phenomena is known as automaticity. And basically, it's about an action that's become mastered and learned thoroughly. We don't need most of our aviation actions to become this automatic. And indeed, for most GA pilots, the amount of time that it takes to master some of our skills, we might not get to this stage. But what we are looking to do is automate our skill sets enough to increase that capacity bucket and be able to manage our workload in times of stress in particular better. So let's move on and have a look at this model here, which is the conscious competence model. And we're going to explore this just a little bit. Now, the human brain retains memory in a fairly laborious process. And once a behavior or action is learned, what we as humans do is require repetition to embed that fully in our memory. And to get it sharp and accurate, we need to keep up that repetition. And this model touches on that a little bit there as well. There'll be a link going in the chat box as well that talks about a bit of an educational link to this model if you want to read into it in further. Well, let's look at the start. So the top left on the green then, unconscious incompetence. That occurs when we're not even aware we don't know something. Before we've even learned to try and learn the skill, we may not even know how to do it, how it exists, what are the component parts of it as well. If you want an example, think about a PPL, like many of you may be going on to do their aerobatics rating. You won't know how to do any of the maneuvers, you won't know what's required in those as well. So you're in that green box. We then move on, if we're going through our aerobatics rating as an example, into conscious incompetence. That's when we start learning a skill, but we're not aware fully of what's going on or how we get to the full level of competence. And this we will discuss a bit more when we come on to situational awareness. So we've moved into that pink box. Then conscious competence occurs later when we've learned a skill, but demonstrating it still takes lots of effort and concentration. And this could be example towards the end of your aerobatics rating. You've done lots of practice, but you're still working really hard at getting those loops well, good, or trying to get that stall turn or whatever nice and clean. And then we move eventually up into unconscious incompetence. And that's when we've mastered a skill, or we think we're getting towards more mastering it. And it's not perhaps totally automatic yet, but we can undertake other activities while doing this skill. And for example, in our aerobatics, that might be when actually you're coaching somebody or you're instructing it there as well. So that's when you can talk and do other things, as well as actually performing the skill. So that maybe that's when you're up to an instructor or you're coaching it. So that's a bit of a model to think about how we develop our competence and consciousness. Let's move on to look at why workload management is important there as well. Curve here that you can have a look at on the playback, or in some of the notes that go out there as well. Well, this is all about workload and a performance here as well. Well, peaks in workload where you feel incredibly overwhelmed or busy, it means that your capacity bucket might be overflowing. Your performance is degraded and you're going to start missing tasks like ATC clearances. And if you start to feel overwhelmed, it's a real clear sign that you're working at the limits of your capacity. And when we talk about workload, I'm not necessarily talking about tasks you're undertaking. It might also include personal stresses that are there in the background as well, such as family challenges, illness, financial concerns. We've had a work call before going flying, things like that. Now, what we can do is try to be aware of these peaks in workload, whether it's in our lives or while flying. And what we want to try and do, which is what this is all about tonight, is to introduce methods to reduce or spread that workload over a longer period of time. And this is all about building capacity. So, for example, capacity is one of the reasons why briefing before a critical phase of flight is so important. If we have that mental model and increase our situational awareness as much as we can, it allows us, one of the techniques to manage our workload a lot better. So I'll give you an example. You're flying to a new airfield, you've read in all the information, you've looked at the airfield plates, you've read about the circuit patterns, you've read up where the noise avoids are and things like that. You've checked the charts and you've self-briefed that on the ground. You've done that well before you approach the airfield, and there you've put yourself in the best possible place to deal with any changes that might occur or any increased stresses that occur, like overjoining traffic or a busy RT workload when you get to that there as well. And like I said, considering the effect of non-flying stressors on your personal capacity is very important too, because you know they may be there in the background. You may not necessarily consciously feel them or think them, but they're there. I remember when my wife's been pregnant a couple of times and I've been flying and instructing there as well. I felt fine, but really there's always that nagging doubt in the back of my head. Am I going to get a call? Is this going to be the day? Do I need to keep my phone with me and things like that? It's always there in the background there as well. So lots of things we can do, and we're going to talk about them a little bit more as we go through. But things like, you know, standard phraseology, standard operating procedures, checklist discipline, these are all other good things that we can do to try and spread that workload management performance there as well. And what we always want to do is try and manage our workload so it's not so high but we don't have any spare capacity left. And what we want to do is retain that little bit of space in our bucket so that in any non-normal or emergency situation or anything unexpected, we've got the capacity to deal with it. So hopefully that's a bit of scene setting. We're going to move on to some specifics now, and Katie's going to talk about drugs and alcohol and their effect on performance. Over to you, Katie.
Thanks very much, Matt. So yeah, some really interesting food for thought there, I think, from Matt about workload management and how we can be the best pilot that we can be. But of course, there's lots of things that feed into being the best pilot. So as Matt said, we're going to have a little talk now about drugs and alcohol and how they can affect our performance. Before we get into detail on the section, however, let's start, as always, with a quick poll. So this one, how long before you go flying should you cease alcohol consumption? Is it 2 hours, 4 hours, up to 8 hours, or greater than 8 hours? So again, one to have a good think about and note the differences between the last two there before you make your decisions. This doesn't necessarily, we're not necessarily talking about the legalities elsewhere in the world. This is really about legislation in the UK. So now we have got some people from elsewhere, which is great. So awesome. So let's have a think about this then. So the EASA recommendation of the correct answer is that alcohol shouldn't be consumed within 8 hours of performing duties related to operating an aircraft, including flight preparation, Really good to see 94% of you got that right. I suspect quite a few of that 6% that said up to 8 hours recognise the 8 hours. That phrase from bottle to throttle, 8 hours bottle to throttle, is quite well known, but some great answers there. So that well-known phrase of 8 hours bottle to throttle doesn't guarantee that the individual's blood or breath alcohol concentration will be below the above-mentioned limits. It's therefore recommended to abstain for longer than 8 hours, as appropriate, in order to take into account the quantity of alcohol consumed. So if you've had a significant amount more alcohol, then you might need to abstain from alcohol for quite a lot longer before you start flying. So many of you will have noticed then that EASA and the CAA have brought in fairly recent legislation in the last few years regarding drug and alcohol testing for airline pilots. We've seen lots of things in the news where pilots have been caught out, normally alcohol testing, often in Glasgow. I don't know why specifically, but we do now mandate regular random testing of crews before flights, where previously it was predominantly carried out in situations where there was some suspicion. So someone was thought to be under the influence or after any accident or incident. And in 2018, EASA released a bulletin referencing a number of GA incidents all across Europe where pilots had consumed alcohol, which was still in their system and thus was still affecting their performance when the incident occurred. The bulletin was published because they recognised the need to remind GA pilots that maximum alcohol limits apply to them too. You'll shortly see a link in the chat box to the EASA and CAA guidance on alcohol if you do want to read a little bit more on this legislation, which it's not the most exciting of reading, but it's got some really good information there for just understanding what those limits are and why they've come into account. So did you know that even as a PPL holder or GA pilot, you can be randomly ramp checked? This might include license checking, medical checking, aircraft inspections, but also random drug and alcohol tests. Now, if you have a reportable incident, like we kind of mentioned earlier, you're also likely to be tested for any psychoactive substances that may have inhibited your performance, regardless of whether these were part of the cause of the event. I'm sure many of you remember from your studies that the Air Navigation Order is the legislation which mandates the maximum amount of alcohol that a pilot can have in their blood while in control of an aircraft. And as part of the PPL human performance syllabus, the effect of alcohol upon performance is covered. The impact of alcohol upon judgment and reaction times especially are well known in and out of aviation. We see instances, as I mentioned before, of this regularly in the media, and I dare say that most of us have experienced the challenges in making good judgment that a couple of glasses of wine can bring, even if that judgment is simply whether or not to have a takeaway or another packet of crisps. So moving on then to the effects of alcohol. As I say, we all know anecdotally, and I'm sure some of you have medical backgrounds, that alcohol does have quite a significant effect on the human body. So the effects of alcohol upon your performance as a pilot can be deleterious in many ways. So it impacts your brain's ability to recall information, thereby reducing your short-term memory, your capacity, and drastically reducing your situational awareness, which we'll talk about later. Alcohol also reduces spatial awareness and leads to an increase in risk-taking behaviour. So I think we can see now how this is adding up into not a great situation, especially we're in a high-risk, complex environment. And these are all skills that are essential for performance in this high-risk, busy environment, such as the circuit or any time we fly. Alcohol reduces the brain's ability to process oxygen. And at higher altitudes, as the partial pressure of oxygen decreases naturally, the effect of alcohol is such you're going to feel more drunk than you would at sea level. And this is going to make your performance even worse. Indeed, at significantly higher altitudes, the effect of one drink normally can be doubled or even trebled due to that hypoxic effect. And you may have experienced yourself a little bit of this if you've had a glass of wine or two while flying on a commercial airliner, even at these relatively low altitudes. Now, most airliners have a cabin altitude of somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 feet, depending on how modern they are. But even then, the effect can be quite significant. Imagine then how you might feel and how your performance might be degraded if you're flying even higher. We're going to have a little talk about drugs now. And it's, I think, something that is probably less well known or less considered by both the general aviation and the commercial aviation sectors. But of course, drugs impact performance. Now, when I say drugs, I'm not talking about Class A drugs necessarily. It doesn't take a cognitive leap to deduce that heroin or LSD, for example, are not compatible with flying, although it's not always stopped people trying. But first, let's discuss an instance some of you may have heard of, it was a while ago, but in 1988, a Fairchild Metro with 17 persons on board crashed in Colorado. It killed 9 of those that were on board the aircraft, and the investigation into the incident determined that the cause was controlled flight into terrain, as is often the case, but it was aggravated by the captain having recently used cocaine. Somewhat unsurprisingly, his judgment and his monitoring were both severely impaired. But the real risk, I think, to both our safety and our licenses as pilots isn't illegal drug use. It's the incorrect or unapproved use of legal medications, whether they're prescribed or you've bought them over the counter. Only a few years ago, the American NTSB published a study into fatal aviation crashes. And between 2008 and 2012, nearly 10% of pilots who died in an aviation incident tested positive for antihistamines, which can have a sedative effect. And almost all of those individuals were private pilots. Now, I think that's quite a sobering fact, that nearly 10% of all the pilots who had a fatal incident had something in their system that could have made them sedated. Food for thought. And it's easy to assume that an over-the-counter drug that you're taking to relieve mild symptoms of illness or pain will be fine to fly with. After all, you're allowed to buy it if you just walk into a pharmacy. Or that the pills your GP's given you to get rid of the heartburn won't be a problem when you go flying that afternoon. After all, they'd warn you if you weren't able to operate heavy machinery, right? Not so much. Think again, because the raft of potential side effects of any medication can, of course, be significant. And drug companies are required to list any reported side effect that's ever been seen, however rare. But it's unlikely that an individual will be able to accurately determine which medication is safe to fly on. To put it bluntly, for most of us, that's really not our area of expertise. Would you be able to bet your safety in the air that the antihistamine loratadine is a non-drowsy drug, but Piriton isn't? For me, I absolutely wouldn't. And this is where your AME is so invaluable. And I saw that we've got 1 or 2 AMEs on the call, which is great. If you're prescribed or you choose to take a course of medication, you need to consult your AME before you go flying. Worst case scenario, they'll recommend taking a few days off while on the medication, but they may also be able to recommend a suitable alternative that won't impact your flying in any which way. After all, their role is to provide medical aviation assurance and advice, as well as ensuring that you are fit to operate. But what about if you do get RAM checked? I think this is fascinating, but indicative drug testing can be quite crude. So for example, the sleep aid night nurse, which a lot of people use occasionally, can often show up as an amphetamine in a saliva or urine test. Now, when it goes to a lab test, when they're really looking for what's caused this to show up as positive, it will be discounted because they can sequence it. They know it's night nurse. But that's still quite scary. If you get ramp checked and they go, oh, you're on amphetamines, you're going to take a step back. So to sum up then on the alcohol and drug stuff, the old adage of 8 hours bottle to throttle for alcohol testing is a minimum benchmark, and certainly doesn't account for binge drinking or, frankly, just having that extra glass of wine. Indeed, a study in 1986 showed that pilot performance for sober but hungover pilots was also markedly worse than those that weren't suffering. Food for thought. So the question is your license and potentially your life worth that extra glass of wine, or can it wait till you get back from your flight? So on that nice and cheerful note, I'm going to hand back over to Matt, and we're going to talk about something that's a little bit less in-depth and serious. It's very serious, but it's not quite so frightening, I suppose. And Matt's going to talk about situational awareness. So Matt, over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Katie. And it's also worth mentioning as well some alternative therapies as well. I had a friend that had a very bad experience after taking an alternative therapy that had some contents that were quite unknown and had some quite wacky side effects with him as well. That only became apparent at altitude. So worth thinking about as well. It's not just prescription and pharmacy things. It's things that you might be able to buy from alternative practitioners and things like that as well. So let's move on to situational awareness, and let's do our traditional poll. So let's have a look at the next poll, please. What do you think situational awareness is? Understanding where you're going, awareness of your situation, and awareness of where you have been, understanding of everything that's around you. Give you a second. Understanding where you're going, where you are, where you've been, or everything that's around you. So the answer that we were looking for was answer D. And let's have a look at how people voted. Yeah, pretty much everybody think. But the key thing here, and the reason we asked this question, is it's the understanding bit. Okay, it's not just awareness, it's an understanding. And that's what I'm going to come on to talk about now. So let's have a look at situational awareness. Put simply, situational awareness, like I say, is an awareness, understanding of everything that's around you as well. So Mika Endley, who's a chief scientist for the United States Air Force, very impressive lady, has done some very impressive academic studies and tomes. She defines situational awareness, and I'm going to read this deliberately: the perception of the elements in the environment within a volume of time and space, the comprehension of their meaning, and a projection of their status in the near future. Now, that's quite wordy. It's very much psychologist. I'm an engineer by background as well, so I like flowcharts and boxes and things like that because that's stuff I can understand. So on the screen there is something that I can understand as a flowchart like an engineer. But she defined situational awareness into 3 increasing levels of complexity: perception, comprehension, and projection. Now, in order to demonstrate good situational awareness, you need to be able to understand things that are in your environment, what their purpose there is, and what they may do next. That's that perception, comprehension, projection. So let me give you an example of this as well. So you're coming to join the circuit in your GA aircraft, and there's another aircraft in the circuit. It's reasonable to assume they're ahead of you, they're going to be making an approach to land, and you need to ensure that there's sufficient time and distance between you and them to allow them to do that landing before you go and make your own approach and landing as well. So that's perception, the comprehension. Now, as a good pilot, you will also consider that they may have to go around off their approach, and then you need to have the situational awareness to react if they do that, and to ensure sufficient separation, or react accordingly if they don't get off the runway quick enough, or air traffic tell you to go around or whatever. So that's developing it to that final projection stage that leads on to decisions and actions, as we talked about there. So what impacts how much situational awareness we may have? Well, many factors, including pilot's capacity, which we've already discussed, but let's have a look at experience and training there as well. So a student pilot, during their first lesson, they'd like to be able to spot another aircraft, for example, near them in the air. But what they lack is the familiarity with the environment or the knowledge of standard operating procedures to understand what that aircraft's movements may mean. And this is akin to them being consciously incompetent, as we discussed earlier. Now, they won't necessarily be able to determine whether separation is sufficient, whether that aircraft is converging or diverging, or be able to understand and put together things that they may be hearing on the radio with what that aircraft's doing as well. So their situational awareness is going to be limited to that first stage that we talked about in that diagram, the perception stage. And that's because they haven't got the mental model of the environment. It's all brand new and overwhelming. Their capacity bucket's full, simply trying to understand what they're seeing, let alone why things are then happening as well. So this example is, well, of course, why we start to introduce communication so early on during the PPL. We don't expect our students to understand why the aircraft they've spotted is a risk. As instructors, we start to build up that situational awareness. We start to train them how to use the cues to build that situational awareness. And then students will start to put these building blocks together to get an increased situational awareness, which then allows them to make their capacity bucket bigger and then have more capacity to absorb greater things during the rest of the training process. Now, your situational awareness as well is also going to be impacted by the environment you're in and how it's optimized to provide the information you need to operate safely as well. So imagine flying to a small airfield, but this time in, say, rural France, where all the air traffic controls and instructions and communications are conducted in France. If you don't speak French, all of a sudden, that information stream that we have been using to build our mental model of where others are has been taken away from us, and our situational awareness is markedly less because you don't know where the other aircraft are from, their transmissions. Suddenly, once again, your capacity bucket has been shrunk and is getting filled quicker. And this can happen not just, with foreign languages, but in a very congested RT environment where everybody's cutting over each other and trying to jump in there as well. And again, just to signpost what we talked earlier of situational awareness, as well as what we've talked about, is also very much affected by personal stress. If your capacity bucket's getting full because of a cold or an argument with a loved one, then your situational awareness is going to be reduced because you don't have the ability to process any new information that's presented to you. So how can we improve situational awareness? Well, the absolute one thing that I believe, or we believe, that you can do to improve your situational awareness is planning and briefing. That is undoubtedly one of the biggest, if not the biggest factor. And that allows us to comprehend what's going on around us and use our experience and training to predict the next steps of the things that are happening around us. Now, it also, it's important not to be too fixed in what happens next. So we may think we know what's going to happen next in situations, but we know that by its nature, aviation is a dynamic and changeable environment. And our model of what's going to come next may turn out to be wrong. Okay, so you'd never expect to have an engine failure, for example, and it's not likely to happen. But having a plan as to what you may do if a failure occurs, such as where the fields are, where the wind's coming from, that's going to allow us to develop good situational awareness in that emergency situation, even though it's not something that, from the awareness of what was happening around us at the time, we expected to happen next. Now, like we said, having a sound mental model can help increase situational awareness. And a little bit later, though, we're going to discuss confirmation biases. But it's really crucial that you amend your mental model to fit what's going on around you, rather than just selecting information that confirms or thinks you confirms your model is correct as well. And feedback can be incredibly useful for this as well. Now, the opportunity for most people's feedback, we get lots of it in the training environment as well. But those of you that are maybe not in the training environment, perhaps this is something you might want to discuss with your hour with the instructor. You may want to have not just talking about some flying disciplines, you might want to talk about cockpit management, you might want to talk about workload management, you might want to talk about how you can use tools like SkyDemon, iPad or checklist shown there to help with your situational awareness and help build your capacity to give you that space to cope with unforeseen events. So, having talked a little bit about mental models and how we can try and build them to think we know what happens next, I'm going to hand over to Katie to talk about how this can go wrong. Over to you, Katie.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. So, next topic for us to look into a little bit is confirmation bias. And I think confirmation bias is fascinating. So before we get into detail on this section, we're going to start, as always, with another quick poll. So this one, what is confirmation bias? Is it the tendency to believe everything that we're told? The tendency to interpret information to confirm what we already know? The tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of an existing belief or theory? Or the tendency to remember old information in a favourable way? So a couple more seconds to make your decision on this one this evening. Super, okay, time's up on that one. So the correct answer for this one is C, the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of an existing belief or theory. So again, the majority of you absolutely spot on, which is great. So if we discount the first and the last, which are slightly different things, it's not about interpreting information to confirm what we already know per se. It's about confirming something that we already believe that may or may not be true. So that's the kind of subtle difference there is kind of know and belief. And we'll talk a little bit more about what this confirmation bias concept is shortly, but subtle differences there. So what is confirmation bias then? It's applicable to every aspect of our working, flying, personal lives, everything we do. Confirmation bias refers to the very human tendency to choose information from that sea of information that we're so often faced with, which fits our mental model of a situation. We filter out the information that doesn't fit what we want or expect to see, and thus change our environment to fit our mental model. And our mental model is, of course, a very adaptable thing. It can be changed as well. We'll discuss that a little bit later. Now, changing our environment and our perception to fit this mental model that we're already thinking about is a problem, because it can so easily lead to us getting lost, or worse. And we're going to talk about some issues that have occurred when people's mental models have been wrong because of confirmation bias. So think back to when you were navigating VFR in your earliest days as a GA pilot, so your first navigation exercises. I'm sure many people have had that moment where they know that their turning point is, say, by a bridge, and have tried to convince themselves that just because there's a bridge ahead, it must be the correct one. And this is confirmation bias. It makes us feel more comfortable because we don't need to challenge our own beliefs or adapt our mental models, which I mentioned we can do, but it is difficult. The issue is confirmation bias is risky. The consequences are unknown, and we can find ourselves going further down a rabbit hole. In that example of choosing the bridge that's ahead as definitely the one you're going to turn on, do you know what? You might have been right, and you might have been right because your VFR nav was spot on. But I'm sure plenty of you have had those experiences where there was another bridge just down the road and you didn't spot that one, and so everything was a little bit off. But you can see how this could spiral. However common confirmation bias is in our everyday life, in our aviation exploits, as I've kind of alluded to here, it can lead to disaster. Think back to 1989 and an event I'm sure you've all heard of, the Kegworth incident, where a 737 crashed on the M1 just short of East Midlands Airport. So that's the photo that you can see on the right. So why did this 737 not make the runway? Well, fundamentally, and to keep it quite short and simple here, it was down to confirmation bias. This was an aircraft flying from Heathrow to Belfast, standard scheduled service, when in the cruise, a fan blade broke in the left engine. And this caused the cabin to fill with smoke, produced severe vibration in the flight deck. Now, this aircraft was a 737-400. It was a new variant of 737. Now, both pilots were very experienced on the 73, but they were experienced on previous variants of the 737. So the 400 was brand new to them both. And so their knowledge of the aircraft systems and what had changed from the 200 or 300, say, to the 400 was far less than it had been on their previous variant. So they looked at the indications in the flight deck, and the captain asked the first officer which engine had malfunctioned, and his response was, "It's the left, it's the right one, isn't it?" Now, this leading question style and clear confusion meant the easiest response from the captain in a high-pressure, high-stress situation was to agree. But what did he actually agree to? And it became clear that nobody really knew at this point. So the crew shut down the right engine, reduced thrust on the left engine to idle, diverting towards East Midlands Airport. So at this point, they've reduced thrust so that they can start their descent. Unsurprisingly, the vibration stopped, and the smell of smoke also reduced. Now, of course, the vibration stopped because they've got no thrust from either engine really at this point. And the crew only realised that something was wrong when they increased the thrust on the engine that was still turning and got very little response. They had shut down the wrong engine, and now too close to the ground, they didn't have time to restart it. Leading questioning styles and confusion over the technical details of the aircraft type led to them shutting down the wrong engine. And with the damaged engine at flight idle, it produced little vibration and far less smoke than it had before. But this concept of confirmation bias led them to believe that they had taken the correct actions. And they made their mental model fit reality rather than adapting their model of what was going on. After all, they had an aircraft that was producing fire and smoke. They shut one of the engines down, and the fire and smoke and vibration stopped. So, of course, they shut the right one down, but they didn't. And it's incredibly difficult, if not impossible, not to be susceptible to confirmation bias. After all, our experiences, beliefs, and values, and even our pride can feed into it. If we've flown a route many times and it's always been fine, we're far more likely to suffer from confirmation bias in the one time that it isn't, as we aren't approaching the route with entirely fresh eyes. So it's not about avoiding confirmation bias and being susceptible to it, because we're all humans and we are susceptible. But what can we do to be alert to it? So first and foremost, we have to recognize that we all fall prey to it from time to time. You need to understand you're susceptible, I'm susceptible. We all have those moments where confirmation bias sneaks in. And from there, what's important is critically assessing all the information before you make a decision. It's very rare when we're flying that you really need to make a split-second decision and react immediately. Even in the case of an engine failure with a single-engine aircraft, as long as you're at a safe glide speed, you can take a moment to have that deep breath and then assess all the information around you with a slightly clearer head. And if you're trying to convince yourself that the weather is in fact good enough to go flying, think about why you're questioning it. I really like the phrase, if in doubt, there is no doubt. And Matt mentioned this feedback concept, but again, confirmation bias is where it's really useful to get feedback from people, get input. So ask a colleague, a friend, or a team instructor that you know, and get an unbiased second opinion. What do they think? Because they're unlikely to have that vested interest that you do if they aren't hoping to go flying. And it'll allow you to consider whether your decision's a sensible one. If you're asked your opinion on someone else's decision-making, think about the question they're asking. Are they trying to lead your thinking because they favour a certain outcome? We've all experienced that in our day-to-day lives. Highlighting what you spot, highlighting the phenomenon, highlighting confirmation bias in itself may simply be enough to make them think more critically about a course of action. And this applies to aviation, but it also applies to everything that's not aviation. So asking open questions to gather information is really important, even if you're flying alone. It doesn't matter how silly you look if you're in the aircraft on your own, no one else is going to hear it or see it. So open questions when you're flying with others and comparing your mental model with theirs allows you to consider what information you have before you take the next step. And this is about using all the resources that you have to avoid and alleviate confirmation bias. If you're on your own, what I do is I ask myself questions out loud. And again, not just in flying, in the rest of my life in stressful situations. Because verbalizing your mental model can provide clarity and give you a chance, while you're talking nonsense to yourself mostly, to consider what you're saying is right. In normal situations, fortunately mostly in the simulator, I do this all the time, as I say, both when flying commercially and GA aircraft. For me, having a problem-solving model that I can use just helps to avoid confirmation bias, because it, as I say, it allows me to verbalize what's going on and work out what possible courses of action there might be. Things that I perhaps hadn't jumped to initially, because I don't know, the last time I did this in the sim, let's take a sim example. The last time I did this thing in the sim, we did this. Well, maybe this time my course of action beforehand isn't appropriate. So what you can see on the screen is one of my favorite mental models for problem solving, which is TDODAR. Other decision-making models are available. TDODAR is great because it gives you a little bit of structure. It might not work for everybody, but it allows you to think about the time you've got available. So is this critical? Diagnose the issue that you've got. Decide on your options. We could do A or B or C. Decide which one's most appropriate. Act or assign, dependent on whether or not you're in a multi-crew environment or you've got people who could be useful. And then once you've done what you decided you were going to go and do, review it. Did this work? Is there another course of action that might be better? There's no shame in changing your mind. As I say, even if you're flying alone, use all resources available to you. And this is going to include air traffic control, for example. Confirmation bias in terms of navigation occurs incredibly regularly, even in the days of electronic maps. And 1215 especially is an invaluable resource to help you rebuild your mental model correctly and your own situational awareness, as Matt discussed earlier. There's no shame in admitting you're human and that you need a second opinion to help you get back to where you need to be as fast and as safely as possible. So all in all, that very human feeling of something just not being right can be an indicator that some sort of situation is unfolding. And if you're feeling uneasy, trust your gut, look at your mental model, critically assess the information you have around you, talk out loud if you need to. Appreciate that's not for everybody. Consider your options and, if needed, ask for help. So that's all I've got on confirmation bias, which I think is quite interesting, but I'll hand back to you, Chris.
Perfect. Thanks ever so much. I'm just thinking back to the days of me flying along, talking to myself, which I've done regularly, having low situational awareness, looking and confirmation bias that that lake or that hill actually is the lake or hill I'm looking for. That takes me right back. So that's brilliant. That's a great run through from both of you. Thanks ever so much. And we'll move on to Q&A now. We have had a couple of pre-submitted questions ahead of the workshop. So thanks to those of you that have done that. I'll fire away. Shall I? That's what we got here. We got one from James. So James has asked, should an aircraft with a serviceable autopilot be a requirement when operating single crew in IFR or IMC? So should an aircraft with a single serviceable autopilot be a requirement? This in the context of workload management and capacity.
Well, I'll give you my opinion first. And my opinion is a politician's answer, actually. It depends. It all depends on what type of mission profile, if I can use those words, you are doing. So I regularly instruct and examine people in PA-28, Cessna 172s. In fact, I've noticed one of the chaps aflown we've just popped up there, that quite happily operate in IMC, you know, going to do an ILS at Oxford, for example, or whatever. That's quite, you know, works out fine. It's quite safe. It's within the envelope, in my opinion. However, if you then start to move up and you start to operate a very complex aircraft, you're going to operate in icing conditions, you're going to operate in and out of airways, maybe over boundaries and things like that. You then might want to start to consider whether the weather conditions and the type of mission profile you're going to do is within the bounds that you can hand fly it, that you can have enough situational awareness and enough capacity as a sole pilot without the backup of an autopilot to be able to cope with that? Or are you going to be operating where your capacity bucket is kind of full and brimming over, and something unexpected like a technical fault with the aircraft is immediately going to spill you over? So I think I would never say it should be a requirement for operating single crew in IMC, but I think you have to very much look at your sortie profile. And I think a few people have just commented on there as well. IFR, long distance, out and pilot, extremely taxing. Absolutely, couldn't agree more. You know, and it's certainly going to be at your destination as well, because you get to a destination, you maybe got a complex approach profile, the risk of a go around, and that's when it gets really, really very difficult, because you remember we talked about our plan and our modeling, yeah? So we've in our head, our perception and our plan is that we're going to land off this approach. We then, for some reason, get a go around and have to go on missed approach. And that's suddenly when the workload gets extremely high, because we haven't thought about that. And I'm sure Katie's seen that as well. When you have a go around for something, that's probably when things get really busy and really quite demanding, I imagine, Katie.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if it's a go around for something that's not expected. You know, I've had go arounds in the past, GA commercial, where something's happened last minute. You know, an aircraft's taxied onto the runway, or somebody's taken off without permission. For clarity, that was GA, not commercial. Or we had an ILS that failed on an autoland, and all of a sudden you've gone from this quite nice calm environment to trying to deal with 101 things, and inevitably that's where air traffic control outside of the UK decide to ask you a million questions about what you're doing, where you're going, and why it's happened. And yeah, I think I'm with Matt on this question, to be honest, that I'm not keen on the concept of mandating things in this regard, because, okay, it reduces risk, but we're choosing a hobby that's inherently a little bit risky, and risk is part of life. But there is a judgment to be made there, I think, in terms of whether it's reducing your capacity as well. And at least if it's there, I suppose you can choose whether or not to use the autopilot as well, which is quite an interesting one.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, moving over to the Q&A box. This one's from David. He says, I imagine complacency can sit anywhere in the competency model, but most dangerous in the last TW, conscious competence and unconscious competence. So where does complacency sit in there, do we think? And where does that?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one to start.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's very difficult to be complacent if you're consciously incompetent. If you're aware you don't know something, then the idea of complacency and having that inherent overconfidence that you know what you're doing is kind of at odds with the concept of it. So you will see complacency far and away more in people who have some level of knowledge, whether that's the conscious competence or the conscious incompetence point. You need to have that knowledge in order to kind of be complacent, I think. What's your thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's all a spectrum, isn't it, really, to be honest, and where you are on that as well. I think complacency is quite an interesting concept, actually, because I've seen some students in certain environments, the military, if I'm being honest, being sort of dismissed and written off as complacent, and I think that's kind of quite dangerous sometimes, because I don't think humans set out to be complacent, if you can put that. I'm not a psychologist, but probably people on this call that can explain it far better than I can. But I don't think humans generally set out to be complacent. I think there's conditions in their environment or in their upbringing or whatever that make them demonstrate complacent-like behaviours, if that makes sense. So I think complacency is quite an emotive word, quite an emotive concept to use. And like I say, I have seen some students in training dismissed as complacent, but actually I think there's other human factors, traits, that mean they may be struggling to learn or struggling to apply the learning that they should have at that stage. And I would be hesitant to call them complacent. So an emotive word and subject.
Indeed. Good stuff. Thank you. Right. This one's about electronic conspicuity. It's from Tilly. Do you think electronic conspicuity devices should be compulsory for all aircraft? This is an interesting one. Let's get into that one. Discuss.
I think I saw somebody saying that stop trying to be non-political or something like that in the questions like that as well. So it depends. So electronic conspicuity, again, is another emotive subject as well. My personal view is, if I've got things that can aid my situational awareness and aid my ability to know what's around me, and I can modify my flying behavior accordingly, I can try and fly defensively, why would I not want to use that? Why would I not want to exploit that information? Where it gets very difficult is, and Katie mentioned earlier about mandating things as well, there's lots of different standards out there. There's cost involved. It may require technical modifications to people's aircraft. So what would appear to be a very easy or obvious answer might actually be quite difficult and challenging to some people there as well. And some people might go, well, £500, that's nothing, that's a few hours flying. But how do you rate that against, if somebody's paying £50 an hour for flying their microlight, that might be 10 hours of flying to them. So that might be, in terms of currency and competency, quite a valuable amount of money. So it's a very, very difficult concept, but I'm very much all in favour of it. My personal view as well is what we should be doing is introducing it more and more into the training and testing environment as well, very early on. We have a situation at the minute where we sort of introduce it into training and testing environment, but what's happening in a lot of areas is students are learning, getting their license, and then they're learning the exploitation of electronic conspicuity aids after license issue. My personal view is we should be integrating that far earlier into the training cycle to get the benefit out of it and make sure people are exploiting it properly as well. Because we could have a debate here, we haven't got time, but can you have too much situational awareness? Can you have too much information coming at you? I've certainly seen that, where people have got that many iPads and devices and chirping and beeping and that in a cockpit, but it's almost too much information coming at you. It actually is degrading your situational awareness. So yeah, Katie, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I think there's you've made some really good points there, Matt, that actually there's probably a disconnect between technology we've got available and what people are being trained with, because the system and the syllabus hasn't necessarily caught up. We had some really good points, actually. A few names I recognise here. Graham's point that there's no point making electronic consecurity compulsory unless it's interoperable is probably a really valid one. That actually, what benefit are people getting? However, I do agree that it's not even about you as a pilot. I think if you are using an electronic consecurity device, you're not necessarily aiding your own situational awareness as much as you're aiding other people's. And we talk a lot about anecdotally in life about how it's not us, it's other people that are the risk. Well, actually, by using those devices, aren't you then making other people slightly less concerning? So you are, by default, helping your own safety. I'd love to see a world where everything comes retrofitted with some kind of electronic consecurity device, and the cost isn't a factor. However, my magic wand isn't currently working, so I'm not sure how we'd manage to retrofit everything and make that mandating of it plausible. But I can't necessarily see why everything that's manufactured or certified these days wouldn't have something that would allow other people to maintain and improve their own situational awareness, I think.
Yeah, good point. Interesting to pull at the point, and many people have mentioned it already in the chat box about information overload as well. To your point, Matt, yes, it's good, but how much is enough and how much is too much? And a debate that will rumble on, I'm sure. Okay, let's go for the last question here. This one's from Ed. It's about TDODAR. Some other people chipping in here, Terry and Hans, so thank you. The question is, TDODAR seems to be aimed at multi-pilot crews. Is there a similar model for single pilots? Terry comes up with Decide, which looks good. That's from the BMAA. Define, decision to be made, explore, consider, identify what's important, decide and implement and evaluate. Is there any others? Any others that we like the look of? TDODAR, Decide?
I think BA used to use a different one, but frankly, I can't remember what it was. There's some quite interesting stuff there. I think one of the points I just want to pick up on, rather than necessarily offering a different model, is the concept of assign can also be action. So if you're on your own, you're actioning that decision you've made, rather than asking other people to split off and do whatever it is they need to do. Yeah. So what might be in a multi-crew passenger environment, okay, I want the cabin crew to go and get all the passengers sat down, could just be you saying to yourself, okay, I've decided upon this and now I need to do A, then B, then C, which is another way of looking at it. And I think Hans had said that actually the model does work well for single pilot. Have you got any others, Matt?
Yeah.
Those are the most common ones. I mean, I go back to the really old chestnut of aviate, navigate, communicate. And I know we keep rolling that out. Everybody rolls it out. But
we've rolled out loads.
It's just so important. It will survive the test of time for forevermore, I think, really. And what I would hate to see is somebody in an emergency situation, but somebody that maybe doesn't fly a heck of a lot. They may be doing a few hours a year because that's all they can afford at the minute. In an emergency situation, thinking TDODAR, oh gosh, what was the O, what was the D? If you do nothing else, fly your aeroplane, sort out where you're going, where you are, where you need to be, and then get some help on the radio, communicate that problem with it. So flying the aircraft, that aviate bit at the first, will always be the same no matter what, and whatever you do after that is going to help you, but keeping you ultimately as safe as you can be. It's the aviate that's the key thing. So I think we've either sent Chris to sleep or he's had a bit of an internet connection.
Am I back?
You're back.
I'm back. Yeah, we're having a bit of an internet issue here this evening. Yeah. I was just about to say that brings us nicely into a nice segue to our next workshop, which is skill fade. There'll be a lot of aviate, navigate, communicate stuff in there. There's some situational awareness stuff in there. There's some know your flows, emergencies. So for those of you that are on this evening, please do come along to that one. That will be coming up shortly, and that will be advertised after this workshop. And that'll be something to come up in June, I think that one is, or May, I can't remember. Anyway, you'll get the details at the end. So thank you. We're at time now. So thank you to Matt. Thank you to Katie. It's been a really interesting hour. I hope everybody on the calls had some good takeaways from the situational and what we can do to be the best pilots we can be. So thanks ever so much to the panel. Thank you, all of you, for coming. As always, there'll be a survey that's going to pop up at the end. Please do give us the feedback, because we do act upon that feedback. But we have run out of time. So all that remains for me is to say another huge big thank you to Matt and to Katie. Thank you.
Okay.
A thank you to all of you for coming. And I'd say see you again soon. Keep in touch. Thank you.